The documentary is called Hell on Earth, The Fall of Syria and Rise of ISIS. Joining me now is the film's co-producer, Sebastian Junger. Sebastian, you've worked in incredibly dangerous areas on the ground in Bosnia in the 90s, embedded with troops in Afghanistan. But in this, you were not able to be on the ground. Does that sort of speak to the magnitude of the crisis?
Yes, there was a very specific threat to Western reporters in Syria. It wasn't so much the danger of frontline combat, it was that you would be kidnapped and executed by ISIS. Obviously that's not an acceptable risk. So we had to work with very brave Syrians who were in Syria and were willing to document their civil war for us, with us. And we used the material that they shot, including a family that lived under ISIS and eventually managed to escape.
You use two brothers in this film. You follow them very closely, Marwan and Radwan. They're struggling to flee ISIS-led territory with their wives and young children. I want to play a short clip of that.
بابا صلح
هاي مثل ما كنتم شايفين هاي مولة البيت هاي الفطور والغداء والعشاء لعنة الله عليك يا بشار الأسد تحب ولا بشار الأسد؟
ها
ليش؟
لأنه يضرب
لأنه يضرب
لأنه
أنت-
كلب
ما تحبينه أنت كمان؟
لا بابا الطيارة عم تضرب
إيه بابا الطيارة عم تضرب إيه يلا قرب على ماما قرب على ماما
ماما
اشبك بابا اشبك بابا لا تخافي لا تخافي ما في شيء بابا
ماما أريد أنام عندك
إيه لا تخافين بابا لا تخافين تعي تعي
Daddy, is the plane bombing? You know, lines like that, I think, speak volumes to the crisis there and how it touches these families. Have you stayed in touch with Marwan and Radwan? How are they doing? How are their families?
Yeah, we got a camera to them, and they self-documented their struggle to survive under ISIS, and then their eventual escape in the back of a truck, hidden in the back of a truck through an ISIS checkpoint. They're in Turkey now, and they're doing very well. They started a small business. They tried to get to Greece on a Zodiac raft. They documented that as well. They were turned back at the last moment by the Turkish Coast Guard, but now they're sort of established in Turkey and really doing very well. We're in continual touch with them.
You know, one of the stunning parts of this documentary is the conflict within Islam itself. The brothers sort of explain to you that when an ISIS member walks into a mosque, everyone's afraid. How is it that they perceive ISIS there? Do they perceive ISIS to be connected to or a function in any way of their version of Islam?
The people that we talk to in Syria completely reject ISIS as a religious organization. They think it's, basically a bunch of criminals, and I would agree with them. They pretend to espouse a kind of radical religious ideology, and really they're just violent thugs that use that as an excuse.
So in this film, you explain the effects of this war, the civil war, resonate throughout the world. And while the conflict may have originated there, its effects are going to be felt by those in the West, even here in the United States. You know, Europe is grappling with the refugee crisis. The United States currently weighing the legality of a travel ban. Do the Syrian people still have hope for Western intervention?
Yeah, I mean, often with civil wars, you hear people say, oh, it's their problem, let them kill each other if they want. Really, a civil war like this, or Afghanistan in the 90s, if it goes on long enough, it produces radical ideologies, which are dangerous. It also produces millions of refugees, which destabilize countries. I'm not sure a military intervention is realistic right now. Certainly, there's military operations against ISIS. I think ISIS will be crushed. I hope so. But the Assad regime is its own criminal cartel. And I think ultimately that civil war may end through the partitioning of Syria into the different ethnic-based areas.
So you say your role as a journalist is not to dictate policy, but to show what's going on in these war zones. Still, in this documentary, you do speak about President Obama's red line. How is the U.S. inaction in some cases, the non-intervention during the Obama administration, how is that perceived in Syria?
I think people on the non-Assad part of the front line were extremely disappointed that Obama did not respond to the outrageous and criminal use of chemical weapons against civilian populations. It killed hundreds of children. And by the way, death by nerve gas is an awful death. You basically choke to death. And so, of course, they were disappointed. You know, that said, had Obama responded, it wouldn't have ended the Civil War, but it might have been the right thing to do. I don't think any of us want to live in a world where chemical weapons can be used against children without any reaction whatsoever.
So the flip side of that is you were already done filming by the time this happened, but when President Trump did take the limited military action in Syria, launching the cruise missiles, have you had a chance to interact with any Syrians to see how that action is perceived?
We had finished shooting, and we no longer have a presence in Syria. I'm guessing, though, that there were people in Syria that really applauded that. I mean, of course, the use of those kinds of weapons against the civilian population is totally unacceptable.
So at one point in the film, sort of the lights light up on a map with the countries that have become directly involved in the Syrian conflict. You say it's like a bar fight, that once the fight starts, everyone jumps in. It began with Syria, then the surrounding regional powers, then Russia, then the United States. You know, is it still a civil war when so many different countries in the world are involved?
Well, all civil wars, if they go on long enough, and most of them do, involve the neighboring states and world powers. In one way or another, I mean, arms flow in, refugees flow out. There's all kinds of legal and illegal activity around civil wars, and much of the world can become invested in the outcome. So the longer it goes on, the harder it is to stop, because you have so many different interests competing in the outcome on the ground. It becomes a big proxy fight.
And of course, it's the people who live there who are caught in the middle. And I believe your father was a war refugee. So how has that shaped the way that you view these conflicts?
Well, he fled when he was very young, the Civil War in Spain, and then when the Nazis rolled into Paris, he's European, and he fled Paris. His father was Jewish, and he was taken in by this country, this great country of the United States. And he was always incredibly grateful that not only did the United States welcome him and the hundreds of thousands, millions of other refugees from the Second World War, but that we intervened and basically saved civilization from fascism. He was enormously grateful. And I think he's no longer alive, unfortunately, but I think it would absolutely break his heart to hear the conversation that's happening in this country right now about whether we should shut our borders to really desperate civilians who are fleeing violence and trying to save the lives of their children.
Sebastian Junger, co-director of Hell on Earth, The Fall of Syria, The Rise of ISIS, airs Sunday night at 9 p.m. on the National Geographic Channel.
Thank you.